everyone, I'm Bandish, the founder of The Curious Mindset. We are a private community for technology leadership teams powered by IT provider 64 Tech. 64 Tech provides IT solutions, but some of the biggest challenges tech leaders face are human challenges, not technology problems. As leaders, there can be pressure to appear all-knowing, which makes it hard to admit what we don't know or ask questions that allow us all to be vulnerable. The curious mindset helps us build the people and leadership skills we didn't know we needed. It grew out of a desire I had to help others overcome the challenges that I faced when I became a leader. I know from experience how isolating being in a leadership position can be, and our North Star here is that no one leads alone. The mantra of 64 Tech is Together We Grow, and the curious mindset is how we can do that. This is a place for us to learn, to share, and become more comfortable as technology leaders. And I'm delighted to introduce our host for today's session, Jonathan Bowder, our technology leader co-host, Steve Maxwell, and our special guest and author, Jason Feifer. Holding up the book now.
Well, thank you very much, Bandish. Curious Mindsetters, special guests. A pleasure and privilege as always to be here in our 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. slot every other Friday, serving you as tech leaders. And we are now on the 5th installment of our journey through managing and leading in a VUCA world. We opened up by looking at what a VUCA world is and what it means to us as tech leaders. And I also provoked you into thinking about management and leadership in a data-driven way. We learned that based on over 1 million pieces of feedback that have been collected, inspiring and motivating others to high performance is probably the most useful thing you can do as a leader to shine a light on the myriad of business challenges and opportunities that you have been bringing to these sessions. 2 weeks later, Anthony Aarons joined us. And Anthony's piece was all around how we actually decide in a VUCA world. So when things are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, decision-making freezes. So Anthony gave us some strategies, but the strategies weren't easy. They were powerful, but not easy. They involved building a brains trust. They involved parking egos at the door. They involved coalescing people and corralling them around an idea that is bigger than their sense of self and their ego. So then we brought in Peter Docker 2 weeks ago, who really blew us away. And his really compelling idea was that through commitment, through belonging, and through this idea of humble confidence, we can start to actually build those kinds of brains trust as well. And there's a beautiful segue to our guest today, who I'm going to introduce you to. You'll probably remember that Peter Docker was very big on something that he called stance. You need a stance. You need to stand for something. Today's guest has really come up with a compelling build on that philosophy of Peter Docker's. And I think it's fair to say that stance and what you stand for personally is going to be intrinsic to the fireside chat that we have today. So I have pleasure in welcoming not just the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur magazine, and you probably saw him waving it around online, but the ex-editor of Men's Health, of Maxim. I feel very square and underdressed reading your bio, Jason, but also a friend and a coach to some of the world's most successful leaders, which gives you huge credibility when it comes to sharing your wisdom and ideas with us. So ladies and gentlemen, can you please put a big virtual round of applause and hands together, and welcome to the fireside, Jason Feifer.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I have to say, I've joined a whole lot of groups, over the years, and I'm incredibly impressed with this one, with the level of detail, of planning and preparation that goes into this to make sure that these sessions are all really power packed for you all. It's a real pleasure. Don't mind me if you watch me literally booting up as we talk. It's 8 a.m. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, as you all know, or you probably do it was the 4th of July. It was a national holiday here in the U.S. And so my family and I, with my 2 little kids, came down to D.C. We usually live in Brooklyn, New York, to visit my wife's parents. I am in my wife's dad's office right now, and we had a late night with the kids and slept in. So I just got up a few minutes ago and rolled into here, and excited to be with you. And my brain will catch up to the time as we're talking.
Well, thank you, Jason. And look, your energy is already contagious. Anyone who has followed Jason and seen him running around Times Square asking strangers about his book will know that we are dealing with a dynamo. And I was going to throw you a bit of a softball, Jason, about how you celebrated Independence Day, but you've crossed that bridge for us all already. So I'm going to cut to the chase. I
Sure.
believe in you. And the thing that has really fascinated the community when I've been seeding the preparatory conversations that we've had, is your approach to adapting and your approach to change, I think, is a paradigm shift. It's almost Copernican in its sort of counterintuitiveness. We've had so many speakers, great speakers, talking about resilience, but what you bring to the table is something completely different. Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I'll just make three quick observations that all go together, and then we can start to unpack them. So the first one is, look, Jonathan, you had said it nicely, but I'll just reinforce. Why do you let a guy who runs a magazine in here to give advice to tech leaders? Right? I mean, I make a magazine, and the magazine can be read by tech leaders, but why am I here? And the answer is because being the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine really means that I have had access for the last 8 years to the most incredible leaders and entrepreneurs in the world. And I've gotten to learn from them, and I've gotten to study them. And my job is literally to take the wisdom that they have accrued and then turn it into useful, straightforward, simple, easy to understand forms of communication. I see a lot of patterns across that, and those are the things that I've used to build the foundation of my insights. So, three things. Number one, what I found is that as I learn from and talk to the most incredible leaders and entrepreneurs in the world, I find that they have all developed a unique personal relationship with change. And that unique personal relationship with change enables them to grow and build in ways that others can't. I've come to believe that you simply cannot lead an organization through change, or even navigate your own company or your own career through change, if you do not have a good understanding of that unique personal relationship. I'm sure we'll be talking about what that looks like. Number two, related, is that I think that once you have an understanding of who you are in times of change, you're able to act today knowing that the things that you're doing are going to change tomorrow. So you get to be really preventative about change, because the actions that you take are informed by knowing that the things you do today will not work tomorrow, or will not fit tomorrow, or will have to be adapted tomorrow. So once you have that in your head, the way in which you make decisions today will change. And then number three is this. I think that as we go through change, we often think to ourselves this question, which I find to be so detrimental to risk-taking, to progress. The question is this perfect? We often evaluate changes and our actions and new things through a question of, is this perfect? And then if it's not perfect, then we tend to back away from it, or try something else. And I think that is this perfect is a terrible question, because is this perfect has only one answer. Doesn't matter what you're asking it about. The answer is no, it's not perfect. It's never perfect. So it can't be the way in which we evaluate change or we evaluate new things. If we ask, is this perfect, as a filter, nothing ever passes through it. So the better question to ask is our new problem better than our old problem? Because when we ask, is my new problem better than my old problem, what we're really doing is oh, and I see that I'm now getting like slammed by lights. So let me see if I can move as I'm talking. Oh yeah, that's good. See, I don't know the sort of light mechanics of this room, because I never work in here. When we ask, is my new problem better than my old problem, what we're doing is we're making room for problems. What we're doing is we're tracking progress through problems. We're all in business, we are all leaders because problems exist and people turn to us to solve it. Problems aren't a problem. When you put all this together, what you're seeing is putting together a foundation for yourself and for the way in which you understand your work, in which problems are tolerated, in which change is anticipated, and in which you, as the centerpiece and your understanding of yourself, is the thing that doesn't have to change. I love Bandish's intro and where he said that the human problems of being a tech leader are the reason to have put together this community. That is very much about what I'm focused on. So anyway, that's the core of my philosophy.
Thank you very much. Very succinctly put, Jason. And there's a couple of fascinating things that we'll explore in more detail. First of all, the role that my identity and self-perception has in being an agent of change. And we'll come on to that in a minute because it's a beautiful build on our guest speaker from a fortnight ago. The other thing, your point number two, how I've interpreted that and pitched the community is that we should actually be proactive rather than reactive. This is about going on the front foot, right? That's your core philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I mean, on that point, just quickly, Harvard Business Review a number of years ago ran a piece with a very compelling headline, which was, "Why do big companies stop innovating?" And the answer that was offered was a great one, I thought, which was this, in short. The answer was, a big company starts as a small company with a great innovation. And that innovation allows them to get a toehold in a marketplace and to grow as they unpack and double down on that innovation. But over time, as companies get bigger, they start to move some and more, and eventually all of their resources away from innovation and towards efficiency. And that is to say that everybody, top to bottom in the organization, becomes incentivized to do things faster, better, and cheaper. And that is what they're rewarded on, and that's what they're celebrated on. And that's not to say efficiency is bad. We like efficiency. But the problem is that if everybody, top to bottom, is just incentivized towards efficiency, then nobody is left to be thinking about innovation and change. Because change can be the absolute enemy of efficiency. And so if we have that in mind, then we realize that although there's nothing wrong with efficiency, we need to be building in the reality that the things that are going to move us forward into the future are going to be to embrace some inefficiencies and to radically change the way in which we operate. And I believe that, to your point, Jonathan, we need to be doing that early. We need to change before we must, which is to say that you need to see the change coming so far ahead that you can react to it as if it is upon you. Because otherwise, I mean, look, you have two choices when you're navigating change. You can either wait for it to come to you, at which point you're scrambling for a solution. You have to move as fast as possible. And when we are moving to stop pain, the number one priority is just stopping pain, which isn't always actually the best decision or best outcome. But if you're moving early and fast enough, then you get to do things on your own timetable. And you get to do things before you're actually forced to.
Yeah, and that the call on us to really show personal responsibility and step up is being very popular with the community. And to help us do that, there's something you said on one of your podcasts, I made a note of it, which really relates to this piece around self-identity and builds on Peter's material from 2 weeks ago. It was something along the lines of, when navigating change or leading change, treat it as an opportunity to dial up who you are. Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah. Well, we got to start with who you are. I think, and what I found as I've talked to so many leaders, and I really have applied this to myself too, is we all make a mistake. I'm sure everybody in this room makes this mistake. And that mistake is that we identify too closely with the output of our work or the roles that we occupy. Which is to say that if someone came up to you at a party and asked what you did, your answer would be some version of the tasks you perform every day or the role that you occupy. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, right? But the problem is that when we tie our identities to those things, well, those things are so easily changeable. And when they change, and let's emphasize the word when, not if, when they change, well, then that doesn't feel like just a change, or that doesn't feel like just a shift to our work. That feels like an affront to our identity. And that's a scary place to be. And if you see that coming and something as core to you as your identity is on the line, well, what are you going to do? The answer is probably one of two things. Either you're going to hold on as absolutely tightly as you can to the tasks and the way in which you perform them or the role that you occupy, or you're going to feel absolutely lost and panicked. So I think that we need to do something now to prevent that. And the thing that we need to do is we need to find the thing about us that does not change in times of change. Because there is something about us that is grounded, that does not shift. And when we have a good understanding of what that is, we recognize that every change is really an opportunity to do the thing that we already do best again or better or in a new environment. So how do we find that? Well, look, I could go on and on about it, but I'll cut to the chase on what it is. I think as a starting point, everybody in this room needs to be thinking about a mission statement for themselves. And I know this is going to sound simple, but it can have a profound impact in understanding yourself and your identity. So here's the mission statement. Here's how you build it. It is a single sentence, and that sentence starts with I. And then after that, every word should be carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that's easily changeable. So what does that mean? Well, here's how I would have identified myself a long time ago. If someone came up to me at a party, what I would have said is, well, I'm a magazine editor. Or I might have said, I'm the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. Both of these are true things, but both of these are very changeable things, right? I mean, here's my phone with my kids, and you know who has this number is my boss, Bill Shaw. I'm the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, but I don't own Entrepreneur Magazine. Bill is the president of the company. He's my boss. He has this number. He could call this phone at any time, including right now, which would be incredibly obnoxious because we're on holiday, but I guess he could. He could call at any time and he could fire me. And there is literally nothing stopping Bill from doing that right now. And if my identity is I am the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, or even I am a magazine editor, then I am one phone call away from losing my identity. And that is a terrible place to be. So instead, here's a better one. 7 words. I tell stories in my own voice. I tell stories in my own voice. Like I said, a mission statement starts with I. After that, every word carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that's easily changeable. I tell stories. The word stories is an incredibly important one for me. And truly, once I came to this realization, it opened up a world of possibilities for me because I recognized that telling stories is something that's inherent to me. It is arguably my core skill set, my ability to process information and turn it into narrative is the thing that I think is at the core of everything, every value proposition that I have going forward. I advise startups. What am I really doing? What I'm really doing is that a founder calls me and he asks me questions because of something that's going on in his business. And the first thing that I can think about or her business, and the first thing that I can think about that I do is I can think about somebody else who I talk to who is in a similar situation at some point and a lesson that they derive from that experience, and I can share that story with them along with the lesson, and that helps them orient. I tell stories with you right now. I tell stories on stage when I'm hired to keynotes. I tell stories in books and in podcasts. Right. In my own voice is me setting the terms for how I want to operate at this stage of my career. When I travel around and I run serious executives through this exercise, they tell me the most incredible things. They say things like, I help teams navigate the most complex problems. I am a puzzle solver. I had one woman who came up to me. She said that she had recently put her consulting business on hold to be a full-time stay-at-home mom. And she has really struggled with that because as much as she loves the experience of being with her children, She used to identify so closely with work that she doesn't know who she is, and she doesn't know what her goals should be anymore. And when I asked her to come up with a mission statement, what she came up with was so profound. She came up with this: I help people become the best versions of themselves, which she realized is something that applies to her consulting business and also applies to her staying at home with her child. And it gave her an orientation point to say, the thing that I am doing now is just another version of the thing that I do best. That's what it means to understand the thing about you that does not change in times of change. And when you have that, you have the beginning of understanding how to navigate through any change, knowing that your core value is transferable and that the thing that you do best, you just have a new opportunity to do.
Thank you, Jason. Incredibly powerful. And ironically, we've had a couple of members of the community who are facing redundancy. We're a very close-knit bunch, and I'm sure their pens are smoking at the moment, going, what's my value statement? What's my mission statement? And with that portability comes security. Now, my question to you is, as tech leaders, would it be useful for us to apply that downwards? And let me explain my thinking. I have an identity as a Django programmer or a Python programmer or someone who specializes in this kind of piece of IT estate. And suddenly we're going to put in this bit of IT estate. Suddenly I'm feeling very nervous because my identity is tethered to my technical expertise. What value is there in us getting our direct reports and people in our organization to embrace this credo of a personal mission statement, a personal value statement, so they would become less change averse when we're rolling out new tech and new programs?
Oh, it's a great question. And I think the answer is that there's tremendous value in running that exercise through, or running your teams through that exercise. Here's why. Because this idea of the mission statement isn't something that just people should be doing and that leaders should be doing, but that entire organizations should be doing. Because once you as an organization have a clearer and a thing that does not change in times of change mission statement, you also have a clarity of vision of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? Your organization isn't built to be running one particular kind of tech system. Your organization is built to be delivering an outcome to your user. And so it doesn't really matter how you get to that outcome, so long as you do. I mean, I remember one of my favorite ways of ever hearing this articulated was from a little name dropping. I got to spend some time interviewing Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and his business partner Danny Garcia, and they said we're not married to process, we're only married to outcome, right? They only care about the ultimate outcome of the thing that they're producing, and the way in which to them is about how it makes people feel. That to them is the ultimate value, is making people feel good, and how they get there doesn't matter. But to an organizational question, here's an anecdote I love. So when people say, "What killed Kodak?"
Right.
The answer that's usually offered is the digital camera. The digital camera killed Kodak. And there's truth to that. And the great irony is that, of course, someone at Kodak had been deeply involved in the development of the digital camera. They didn't take it seriously. They put it on the shelf. And then ultimately, it became the thing that undercut their entire business model. I heard a really wonderful theory, actually from across the pond from me in your area, from a guy named Hamza Mudassir, who's at Cambridge. He's a disruption expert. And he told me, interesting thought experiment. What if the digital camera did not kill Kodak? What if instead Facebook killed Kodak? Now, how does that work? It's pretty interesting. All right, think of it this way. We're all, I can see everybody's faces here. We're all old enough to remember the early digital cameras, right? The early digital cameras sucked. They were big and clunky. They were noisy. They didn't store that much, right? Like the storage capacity was very low. I don't have the terms for digital cameras, but the photos were grainy. It was not a good product. So if people were to buy it, and I remember doing this myself, you would bring it along with your film camera. And your film camera would be the thing that you took your actual good photos on. And then this digital camera is like, you just sort of like play around with it like a piece of junk. And the thing that changed that was Facebook. Because Facebook was actually the first mass use case for digital photos. That was the first time in which people knew what to do with digital photos. Oh, you could put it in a centralized place and organize them, and other people can see them. That makes digital photos valuable, more valuable in some way than what I had previously been doing, which is having them printed out and putting them in a book or putting them on my fridge. That was the thing that encouraged people to start taking more digital photos. And once people were taking more digital photos, there was more incentive for the digital photography industry to vastly improve their product. And that drove adoption, and that killed Kodak. Now, why am I telling you that story? Because I think that Kodak made a critical mistake, which is that Kodak thought of itself as in the camera film business. If you ask Kodak, what do you do? What we do is that we create camera film. No. What would have happened if instead Kodak came up with this mission statement for itself? Kodak captures people's memories. Now, once you have that, Kodak captures people's memories. Does it matter how you capture people's memories? It does not, because you're not in the business of camera film. You're in the business of capturing people's memories. So you better start exploring all the ways in which you can capture people's memories. And they would have seen social media rising. Facebook wasn't the first one. It was like the third one. There was Friendster and there was MySpace. And also, they had so many more resources than some dropout from Harvard. They could have easily gotten into this game, and they didn't because they had a different understanding of their mission. So yes, Jonathan, everybody in your organization and your organization itself should all be thinking about what is your mission statement such that you understand your value even in times of change.
Right. Well, very, very powerful. So the power of an organizational mission statement and value statement, the power of a personal one, and the power of encouraging everyone to be thinking about the transferable value that they add rather than them just being a technical expert. So powerful. Now, all of this has been looking at the inner game of adaptation and change, and the fact that it's an opportunity for me to step up. Now, even in organizations that you work with where people do that, change and adaptation can still be sluggish. What's your take on why organizational change and tech rollouts still fail and still hit choppy waters?
Yeah, well, this is the fun thing about talking about change with leaders, is because we all really experience change in two ways, right? I mean, we've spent so far our time only talking about one of them, which is us reacting to and navigating change. But we are also the introducers of change. We create new things, which we then have to introduce to our users. We also create changes that we have to introduce to our teams. So we are at once navigating change, and we're also creating it for others. And I think that the mistake that we all make when we do that is that we become so familiar with and convinced of the value of the new thing that we have created or are offering or are leading people through, that we forget that it may not make any sense to anybody who we're talking to.
Right.
And then our instinct is to push, is to logic our way through it, is to say, no, let me explain it again. No, this is why it's better. And that doesn't work. And the reason why that doesn't work is because people don't like new things. But you know what they do like? They like better versions of old things. That's what they like. So we need to understand and know that. And we need to navigate change and introducing change with an understanding of that. We have to use what I call the bridge of familiarity. Bridge of familiarity Well, to explain the bridge of familiarity, I'll tell you one of my favorite historical anecdotes as a way of appreciating it. So, uh, in the early or in the I'm sorry, in the mid and late 1800s, the early versions of the car, the automobile, were introduced. People didn't call it the car or the automobile, they called it the horseless carriage. And that's if they were being generous. If they weren't being generous, they would call it the devil wagon because people hated this thing. They would stand on the side of the street and they would scream. This is true. If you were in a horseless carriage in the late 1800s in London and you drove down the street, somebody would be standing on the side of the street and they would yell, "Get a horse!" at you. They would yell, or they would be throwing rocks at you, or if you were out in the countryside, they would be shooting shotguns at you. They hated this thing. So how did we get from get a horse, devil wagon, throwing rocks and shooting at it, to dominant mode of transportation worldwide? The answer is often said is Henry Ford. Henry Ford revolutionized manufacturing. He made cars faster and more affordable and therefore more accessible to more people. That is true, but actually, when I talked to an automobile historian, I learned that Henry Ford was actually the beneficiary of a change that came before him that had set him up for success. And that thing is often lost to history and time, so I will tell it to you because it's what I learned. And that is this. In the early days of the car, as there was not the adoption that the car manufacturers anticipated, they realized that they were making a fundamental mistake about the way in which they were introducing this new thing to the population. And that is that they were advertising and talking about the car as a replacement to your horse. They were saying, get rid of Dobbin, a generic name for a horse, like Spot for a dog. Get rid of Dobbin and get this car. And people hated that because, like I said, people don't like new things. What they like is better versions of old things. And they found this suggestion of getting rid of their horse to be absolutely offensive. They liked their horse. Their horse was a member of their family. As far back as generations that they had ever known, they had horses. And now here come the late 1800s versions of Silicon Valley tech bros who are basically saying, this thing that you're doing is stupid and old and you should stop. And people don't like that. So the car industry realized that they had to make a change. And the change that they made was brilliant. They stopped talking about the car as a replacement to your horse, and they started talking about the car as a better horse. They started popularizing terms like horsepower. They started to name cars after horses, which we still do today, the Mustang and the Bronco. They started to put mechanical horse heads on the front of cars, which we don't do today, but you get the idea. And it's not like people are stupid, right? People aren't like, oh, well, I guess this is a horse now. They understand. But the thing was that the car industry was starting to talk in the language of the consumer. And they were starting to signal to the consumer that we understand your needs, we understand your values. And they were starting to put this new and unfamiliar product into the context that's familiar for their consumer. What do you do with a horse? You can do that with a car too, and here's why it can be more valuable as a better horse for you. This was the thing that drove adoption. And this is an early example of what I like to call the bridge of familiarity. That's the solution to the problem, Jonathan, that you had laid out. It's the bridge of familiarity, which is to say that we need to build a bridge that doesn't start with us and go to them. It's not about what we made and how great it is and how we can get it to them. It has to go the other way. It starts with what they are comfortable with, what they are familiar with. And then you build a bridge in both language and in concept that starts with them and their problems and their needs and goes from them to us. And the most important way to do that, I think, is that you start by understanding and speaking in the outcome of the thing that people are interested in. You know, we as leaders, we are so focused on solutions. Nobody wants a solution. Nobody cares about your solution, right? Your solution is not the thing that they wake up in the morning looking for. I just signed up for a new bookkeeping, AI bookkeeping service. Was I looking for a bookkeeping service? No. What I was looking for is having to spend less time on my finances so that I can spend more time on my work and with my family. That's the outcome. So I don't care about bookkeeping. I didn't wake up in the morning and think about bookkeeping, but the bookkeeping company is thinking about bookkeeping. They have to stop that. They have to instead start thinking about outcome. How do you talk to me in the terms of what I want as a result of your solution, instead of talking about your solution? And the way to do that is to focus on them and to focus on their understanding and their context of the world, and then build the bridge from them to you.
Such a powerful reminder. I mean, seek first to understand is something Covey talked about 20 years ago, Dale Carnegie over 100 years ago. And we still drink too much of our own Kool-Aid, right, Jason? Both when we're marketing products, but when we're pitching change programs. And your advice is, whoa, wait a minute, what's in it for them? Meet them where they are, right?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, like, I'm not inventing this. I'm just giving it a fancy new term. But you're right. I mean, look, the reason why we can spend hundreds of years talking about this is because it is so easy to forget when
Right.
you are in the weeds of developing something and you know that it's great. It is so easy to forget that people don't see things the way that we do. And that when we focus on what we want, we never get what we want. But when we focus on what other people want, we do. It's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah, you've also done a very good pitch for your own mission statement, because the analogy of a bridge of familiarity is needed, but that image is now emblazoned on our brains as tech leaders. We've forgotten Covey, we've forgotten Carnegie, we're not going to forget that. So again, that plays to your value, right? As a storyteller.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then, as I think that stories are about the most important thing that you could do. And the reason for that, this will get a little meta for a second, but I'll share with you because I think it's an important lesson in how to communicate change or anything else to people. So the way in which I had a really interesting conversation a number of years ago with an academic who studies how people learn. And she said that the way in which people learn and the reason why people remember things is because information attaches to existing scaffolding. And that's the word that she used, was scaffolding. Okay? So let's, for a second, as a way of understanding this, think of something that you find interesting, but that you also find impossible to retain in your head. I have an example that's easy, which is I find ancient history and also cosmology, like the stars, to be very interesting. So if I'm flipping around on my phone and I come across a story of the earliest cave art from 50,000 years ago was just found, or now we understand some reason that this black hole exists. I find that stuff so interesting, and I read it every time, and then I instantly forget it. I have absolutely no retention for this stuff, even though I find it interesting. You know why? It's because I don't have the scaffolding of information inside of my head to attach that new information to, right? We learn incrementally. So if you are a tech leader, well, then whatever it is that is your core expertise, you have a strong scaffolding for. And if you gain some new piece of information that's related to existing information, you can attach that thing to the information that you have in your brain, and it will stay. Because your brain is a filtering device, and its job is to forget almost everything that you come across, because you have limited bandwidth, and it needs to make sure that it's focusing its energy on the things that are going to be the most important. And the things that are going to be the most important are the things that you've already invested time in. So that's why we forget those things. So if you are delivering new ideas to people, then you need to be mindful not just of delivering those ideas, but of also building some of the scaffolding that they can have in their heads that they can attach that new information to. If I only spoke in theory, and I got a lot of theories, I've got names for them, bridge of familiarity, but if I only spoke in theory, then you would have very little scaffolding in your head to attach those theories to. It would be harder to remember them. But we all naturally, as human beings, understand the world through narrative. That's how we see the world. It's how we understand ourselves. We are constantly narrativizing everything that we see. And so we remember stories a lot easier than we remember information. So if I tell you a story, you're likely to relate that story in your head to something else that you had learned, or, oh, I know some person that's just like that, or that reminds me of something that I did. And now that story is in your head. And now if I can take that story and then attach an idea to that story, you're more likely to remember the idea too. That's the reason in which when I talk in stories. I usually tell a piece of information and then a story that helps them remember it. And then I give it a big idea, I give it a big name, so that the whole thing feels like a bundle that stays in your head. And when you are a leader and you're talking to your teams, you should do the exact same thing. I do it all the time internally. When we have meetings, I often will open up by talking about an entrepreneur who I just met who told me this thing that leads into this idea that we now need to focus on. Or I was just talking to a reader and this is what they told me, and that's why we need to be thinking about this.
Yeah.
Those stories orient people, but more importantly, they give them the foundation to remember the next thing that you say.
Thank you, Jason. And a really important reminder for us to be storytellers when we are identifying and closing the bridge of familiarity. That's been a huge takeaway. The bridge of familiarity in and of itself, a huge win for the community. Thank you. This idea of starting with yourself and really crafting a sort of purpose, a mission, a value statement. Absolute nectar. And I recommend people read the book and check out the podcast, because there is more information which we don't have time to cover on the whole thing that you said about, is this perfect, as well, or whereas it should really be, is this problem better than the old problem? So thank you very much. We've got the questions stacking up, and before I